Well, welcome to the Inviting Shift podcast. This season, we are talking about anxiety and those of us who experience moments of anxiety or even waves of depression, sadness, grief, and how we kind of deal with all of that. I'm Christina Smith. I'm the host of Inviting Shift. And today we have Michael Trotta on. And Michael is from the Sagefire Institute in New York. Welcome.
Hi.
And he is all about nature-based coaching and really getting us back to our own nature, is from what I understand. And if you were listening a couple weeks ago, we had Lynn Trotta on, and Lynn is Michael's wife. So they both have their own very beautiful gifts, and when they come together, they have this beautiful farm, and they tap the maples. It's really beautiful. I love seeing images from Lynn and what she's telling us that she's doing and taking care of the chickens. I love all that stuff. So welcome, Michael. Tell us, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this nature-based coaching.
Okay, a little bit about myself, how I came to it. The short version is, there is no short version. I will go back as far as my real life career. I was an educator, taught elementary and special ed. There's a lot with anxiety mixed in there that we can talk about when we get into it. But I really wasn't happy with what was going on in schools and for myself. And so I went back to nature, and I just immersed myself in learning about naturalist skills and wilderness skills and awareness skills. And I was just so blown away by the connections I made with native elders and people who had been studying about nature-based cultures and how they educated children, that it made it impossible for me to stay in my modern education type job. And so I left, and Lynn and I started our own nature-based mentoring programs for kids. And we did it for a bunch of years. And the thing we struggled with was really explaining to their parents, the kids' parents, what exactly it was we were doing. You know, we were this really amazing nature program. I was the nature guy. Lynn was the nature lady. And parents would, in the dirt. Parents would come back and be like, "It's amazing how different my kid is." And we would say, "Great, we're glad you see that. And we're like this one point of connection for your kid with nature. We need to have multiple points of connection. So let us explain what it is we're doing." And often what it did was it brought up parents' stuff, you know, and I was like, what's happening? I thought I'm just sharing philosophies and about nature, and all this stuff that wasn't in the way for children was completely in the way for their parents. And so I started to look around and say, okay, what do I do? And that's where coaching came in, and I got trained as a coach and started blending coaching with nature connection. And that's how we got here.
And it's so important. And I did watch, like I've mentioned before, Michael and Lynn have some really great live training. So go to sagefireinstitute.com because they have some really awesome live trainings that they hold. And they are, phenomenal. They're pretty short, and they're phenomenal. They really give you a lot of good information. So today's podcast is because I was listening to their training just a few weeks ago about these four natural gifts that we have. And before we go into that, I just wanted, have you had experience with anxiety or depression in your life?
Yes.
You could raise your hand on that one.
Yes, definitely. You want to know all about it? You tell me.
Yeah, a little bit about it. Yeah, because I think that there's a lot of people who, sometimes I think people are unsure, is this anxiety? Is this normal? Is this, and so there's a huge difference between like having experience with anxiety or anxious moments and then having, full-blown medical condition, which I think, people should always see whoever they trust for their medical decisions, their medical professional for that. But there are ways that we can manage it. So what are some of your real life examples of dealing with anxiety?
Yeah. Well, so in my own life, first, I don't know if anxiety is normal. I know it's common. right? And so I don't think anybody should feel like out of the ordinary of their experience. And I personally don't believe it's the individual. I believe it's a bigger picture cultural thing that's out of place, that the rest of us, those of us that experience anxiety, are almost serving as like indicators of an unhealthy culture.
More like a symptom.
Right. And our own anxiety is telling us something is off. And it would be really easy. And I think a lot of the time the current medical model might say something like, well, it's something in you that's off. But I believe more there's something off in the environment. So in my own experience with anxiety, I think I had spoken to you in an email. As a kid growing up, I'm dyslexic. Yay, learning disabilities. And so the weird thing was that, I went to a pretty decent school system, or so supposed to be. I knew I was smart. Like, I was capable of doing things and seeing things and perceiving that in ways that a lot of my peers weren't. And yet I kept getting feedback from the school that I wasn't doing it right, or that I wasn't doing it fast enough, or that it wasn't. And a lot of that was the result of my learning difference. But that created anxiety. Like, I want approval, I want to fit in, I want to do well, but the feedback was no, 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 no. And then to add to that, when I was 12, I lost my father. And you can imagine something like that could increase one's anxiety and depression and things like that. And I dealt with it in all of the current ways that people deal with things like that, therapy and at times medication. And even when, like in the story I was talking about before, when I was teaching, I was watching child after child after child, just like the anxiety build as the school system was even amplifying what it was like for when I was a kid, with state standards and testing. And I remember the school motto for a while for the teachers was that children should have their eyes on text 90% of the day. Like, I just saw your whole body. Like that's, they're children.
And I'm even like a visual verbal learner. Like, I can learn by reading, and that's still pretty intense.
Super intense. Well, I can go on and on about my judgments about that, but literally in the 10 years I was in the school system, there was at least 5 children I knew that were on suicide watch during the year. And it's one thing if one child, in your 10 years of teaching, but over 5, and that's just the ones that were on suicide watch. That doesn't include the ones that, were having all of the kind of anxiety issues that most of us have become familiar with.
Or weren't even talking about it, that's a big thing.
Right. And so that's when I was building relationship and an understanding of this native way of building. And when I say native, I mean people who have a deep relationship to the environment around them, right? And yes, a lot of it, in my experience, came from Native American cultures and what I learned from them. But it's a universal thing. Native cultures all over the world had a similar way for thousands and thousands of years of educating children in such a way that they created surface area for learning to happen, but it was always coming from the natural drive of the child. And it was done in community, right? So it wasn't one teacher with 20 students and eyes on text. And that model of education is so reflective of what's happened to our culture 10,000 years ago, where we moved from living in communities to domination structures where a few have power and say, and the rest do the work. And that is absolutely not how we evolved and how we evolved to live. And in order to live that way under the control of someone, that someone or thing has to, what's the word I'm looking, suppress the individual frequency of the human being. And I believe the suppression of one's natural and authentic frequency is in fact what creates anxiety.
Mm. And that makes sense, right? If there's a lot of kids experiencing stress or anxiety, is it all of those kids, or is it the system that we're putting them into? And I am one that says that standardized tests is, not the best measure of intelligence.
There's plenty of information to show. Actually, it's not a measure of intelligence at all.
Yeah, it's a measure of test-taking skills.
If you even look at the history of intelligence quotients, a lot of them aren't actually effective measures of a person's. They're not a measure of, and it's been proven that they're not a really effective measure of a person's overall intelligence, because they measure a very specific set of abilities. Mm-hmm. So it's what you do with any of those things, really, and how you carry them.
Yeah. So instead, so what I'm hearing is perhaps that being more in connection with our nature, with, our actual frequency, as you were saying, that is when we experience less stress, because we're on the same vibration pattern, basically, or frequency as those things. And I think that there is a lot. I mean, look how much our society has changed just in the last 300 years. I mean, and I don't think our biology or our evolution could really catch up to that so fast. Our brains have become almost too good. So then, so connecting with these 4 natural gifts, is that one way that we can kind of get more in balance back to our nature?
Yeah, so the program that we ran, that you were able to listen to, Awakening Our 4 Natural Gifts, we go by the philosophy that the gifts are in us. We're born into this world with them. And our desire to help people awaken to them is really just to make them aware of them so they can stop suppressing them. Does that make sense? Because that's what we do. Let them do their job. Nature has done this unbelievable job of designing us, right? And of bringing us into a relationship with who we really are. We just get out of the way, or at least work with it to enhance that. And it's sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's kind of challenging as we go, though, because as we are raised in this system of authority and everything, we're kind of told as we're growing up to give up that intuition, that inner wisdom that's telling us to go do something else, right? That we have to conform to this way that other people think that we should, show up. So it's a natural thing, I think, that happens in this culture anyway, that we try, and then we have a distrust of ourselves, because
totally. And that's what I was saying with the adults. Like, the kids got it that I worked with. So the first natural gift that we talk about is play, right? That we come into this life, into this world, downloaded to play. It's how we connect with the environment around us. People don't have to teach us to play. We just do it. And there's actually a set of types of play, things that we do when we're allowed to engage with the environment, games that come out of us that are deeply linked to our survival. Making forts is one of them, right? When nobody teaches you to make a fort, you just throw a blanket over something or sticks and you climb in it, and that turns into like an imaginary game of house or those sorts of things. And what can be done is we can watch for those gifts to come up and out in children and leverage them to deepen their learning, to deepen their experience. And what that gift does is it teaches the individual about the self. It helps them figure out a sense of who they are, what they believe, what they're capable of, what they're good at. And if we just get out of the way and allow for play, or at least, I should say not at least, and leverage it, I believe we could build stronger children with a stronger sense of self, who move into adolescence ready to focus and learn. That's the second gift, focused learning, on what really brings them alive. And you'd have to blend in nature connection with that, because that's how we're designed. But yeah, so now what we do in our current education system is eyes on text 90% of the day. There's no time for play. But nature wants us to play. That's how we're engaged. And yet we say no. And when we say no, that saying no is a squashing of our real life natural self and frequency. And we think we're helping, but I think we're crushing. And when that crushing happens, children get anxious.
Yeah. Well, there's a big difference between, like, I remember in my middle school, we had this conservatory right next to it. So there was a big difference between learning about nature when we were walking through it and seeing it and touching it and smelling it and being able to see all the pieces of it, rather than reading about it or just seeing pictures of a certain type of flower that's not even around where you live, you know, and trying to dissect that. So I can see that. And it also brings this curiosity and this kind of passion for life that play does, you know, that we find things that we're interested in. And I think it's crazy when we're asking, you know, 6-year-olds, what are you going to do when you grow up? I'm 6. I haven't even discovered the world yet.
Right. And that is the way I think you'll see a lot of nature programs today. You go to the nature museum that's local and you get kind of pulled around by somebody who knows all these big Latin words that you have no idea what they mean. And you're looking at animals that don't live anywhere near this environment. It's like, oh, a hedgehog or a python. Cool. You know, like, what about the flying squirrel that lives in the tree right outside this building? How amazing is that? How is it adapted to this environment? But we're looking at something because we're judging it as more exotic or better or whatever. It actually kills curiosity, which is a part of the frequency of play. And it doesn't create the connect to the land that you're on, which is reflective of the self. So there's all of these disconnects happening. And to your point about the play, you take a kid in the woods, you don't have to teach them anything about nature. Just let the play start happening.
To ask questions. I mean, I this part of me opened up several years ago when I was doing a sitting spot thing because Lynn was talking about sit spot.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden my husband's really into nature and stuff, but he knows like all of the names of the things. Like all of a sudden I was like bringing back leaves and going, what's this? What's that? And that was like, that's what it reminds me of when you discuss this. Like I wasn't allowed to do that when I was young. It was all about, you know, schedule and stuff to do. And now that I'm older, that little kid spirit in nature comes alive and goes, I want to know about this. And I have more questions about nature now than I ever did when I was a kid because I wasn't in it.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, I saw it in the zoo, but that was, you know, a day. And it wasn't even anything I see normally. So didn't relate.
There's some interesting stats, like in Richard Louve's Last Child in the Woods, he talks about the amount of time children spend in nature and the range or the space that they get to actually play has been reduced by something like 90% since the 70s. And in as nature connection and play has gone down, anxiety, obesity, depression, all of these other childhood troubles, if you will, have almost in equal measure gone up on the other end of the scale. And it seems obvious to me.
Right. Yeah. So where do we go from the child gift?
So if childhood is spent engaging with play, learning about the self, something happens when we go into adolescence where
a lot of things happen.
And one of those things is the brain. Lynn just taught me the word massive ganglionic die-off. It's like, wow, there's a band name. Parts of the brain start to die off so that the parts where you are most curious can really focus. And so you begin to focus your learning on those things you're most passionate about, those things being the things you played with and were most intrigued by in childhood. So as an adolescent, you come into that stage. And with that focus of the brain, we also start asking questions like, who am I and why am I here and where am I going? Where am I from? In some form or another. I didn't ask that question directly when I was 12, 13 years old, of course, but I did start to look around and say, oh, I'm not my mother. And I would start to rebel against her because I wanted to develop my own identity. That's a part of asking those questions. And so traditionally, what would happen, and when I say traditionally, I mean for like, you know, the first 200,000 years of human existence, at that stage, the village elders would notice that you're starting to ask those questions, and they would provide a rite of passage for you to go through to ask those questions in a ceremony-based way and receive mentoring and support in answering those questions. And always they involved nature connection and the development of skills for nature awareness, because if you weren't aware of nature, nature was aware of you, and it ultimately would, get you. So you were aware, you knew how to take care of yourself, you started answering those questions, and you were developing the parts of yourself that you felt most called to develop, right? I mean, for me, when I think of that, it feels like a natural flow. It feels, I can feel the support of the community. It's coming into a more fullness of myself. My frequency is expanding, not being contracted. Mm-hmm. And when you reach a certain point in that expansion of who you really are, and you've developed an understanding of some of those questions, the next stage or natural gift that starts to express itself is the desire to serve, to use those gifts to serve the community, the environment, the people in your life. And I mean, I don't know, for me, it's one of the fullest expressions of the human experience is the ability to share your gifts with other people. Contrast that to how many of us live today, where at a very young age, or maybe not, we start thinking about, well, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to, what job should I pick? I mean, that was kind of what I did. I said, I'm going to do this because that'll make money and everybody approves of that. But I work with a lot of adults who are in that stage, who have been there for a while and have lots of anxiety, or deeply unhappy because they didn't put their gift forward. Mm-hmm.
And there's probably a bunch of them that never stopped to discover their gifts, because they were just told, hey, like I was told, you're good at math, here's what you should be doing. You know what I mean? And it put you down that aisle, and the way I felt was like, well, they must know what's right for me, right? I mean, and yet I could do math. I just don't like it. Like there's no passion or curiosity about it. It all tends to work out.
Sure.
So, so in that place, I think that, that's that other disconnection that we have as we're going.
Yeah.
So the adult is the responsibility where we start serving others.
Correct.
Nice. So in that spot, when we're serving others with our best gift, and
I want,
yeah, go ahead.
Because there's a lot of programs out there that talk about, figure out what your gift is and your passion and what the world needs. And that's how for me, really, I mean, there's something to all of that, of course. Mm-hmm. But just because you're gifted at something doesn't mean that that's how you want to serve the world, right? And I'm not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is that by the time you get to adulthood, you've developed the potential is that you've developed this understanding of your unique frequency, which I call your original medicine, and that we each have this unique frequency that just by nature of being in relationship with it, we affect the world around us. I think of it like, here's a frequency. It's like a tuning fork. The people who most need that attunement will come to you and receive some of who and what you are. You don't have to really do anything to do that. You don't have to say, okay, now I'm going to listen and fix you. Just be who you are. That's why they're there. You give them what you need. I know it sounds super simple, but it is. And the more you can be in that frequency, right? The more you can remove anything that restricts it, the more you can help. Mm-hmm. And you can bring that into whatever form of work you want to bring that into. I used to think I have to figure out what this frequency thing is, my medicine, so that I can pick the job that it's best suited for. Instead, now what I do is I have an understanding of my original medicine. I continually build relationship to it, because it's not I know what it is and now I'm good. It's a process. And as you grow and grow older, things come into your life that you have to decide, does this enhance my frequency or does it restrict my frequency? If it restricts my frequency, what do I want to do about it? Is it a matter of setting boundaries and not engaging with it? Is it a matter of finding a way to be in relationship with it without it restricting your frequency? And so what I was saying is, in relationship to my frequency, I apply it to everything that I do, right? It's not a one job, but I have lots of things that I do, both because I want to and also for income. And I apply my frequency to all of those things. So it's not just about picking your talent or your passion and saying, this is who and what I'm going to do. I think it's more than that.
So I like that. It's the underlying of who we are, basically, right? What I don't even want to use moral or guidance, but there's some kind of, here's where I am, here's my true north. And so everything and all the roles that I have kind of revolve around that.
Right.
They don't define that gift or whatever. Because I love that you say that, because when we say gift, we often think it's this thing that I'm the best at.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it could just be something that you're mediocre at, but somebody else needs. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be Van Gogh in order to paint. Just the fact that I paint, like, I don't sell any of my paintings, but the fact that I paint, brings me more happiness and brings me back into my frequency. And therefore, when I go do the next thing, I'm already in that frequency. So I'm bringing that frequency to the next events or people or whatever I run into. That's the frequency that I'm on. So is that what you mean? Like, to stay on your frequency? Whatever.
Very much like that. Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. So I sculpt. It's something else I do. And it's one of the things where I started to really better understand this whole frequency, because I would sculpt something. It would align me with my frequency and kind of push away the restrictions, because it was a place of joy. It was a place of play for me. Mm-hmm. Right. It was the frequency of play. And that's, if we go back to that, when I say play, yes, there's actual like physical activity, but play is a frequency. You don't have to do physical activity to be in the frequency of play. So for me, sculpting started as play. And then I went into that phase of focused learning, like, how can I get better at this? And the curiosity got deeper and more specific. And then I started to actually do the sculptures in the way I want. And it was a full expression of myself. And then I saw people, strangely, it was strange to me because it was unfamiliar, like, oh, can I buy that from you? And what? Like, yes, yeah. And it was really neat to watch people's response to the different things that I would sculpt, and who was drawn to it. And I would ask them, so what is it about this that you're drawn to, that you would pay me money for it? And they would describe things that I'd be like, oh my God, like that little sculpture is like a little speaker kind of putting out the tune of who I am, and they're picking up on it. It's like, and obviously the people who needed some of that were drawn to it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It was kind of like a mind, like, wow, that's really, really cool.
Right.
But it's physical thing could be an expression of that.
Yeah. You didn't start going, I'm going to be a sculptor and that's what I'm going to be. And, it wasn't about that, because I think sometimes when people do that automatically, they're like, oh, I like this thing, I'm going to put everything of who I am into this. That can be detrimental too, because there is a balance in our life, and we can say, yeah, it has to be this. Like, what I love is, like, not everybody who loves to play baseball is going to be a pro baseball player. Right. You might be the coach, you might be the guy selling the tickets, you might be a manager. Like, I mean, you can still be in baseball if that's important to you. Yeah. And your gifts may not be of the physical actual athlete. You might be the accountant, like, who knows?
And that's something I do with a lot of clients too. They come with that kind of literalization, like, I have to figure out what this is so that I can get a job doing this thing. Mm-hmm. And children don't think like that. No. Right? When they're playing, they don't think like that. They're taught that. And I was taught that too. So I would be lying if I didn't say, I'm going to be a professional sculptor and I'm going to make a business out of this. And I wound up doing that. And there were some places where it worked well and some places where it restricted things and it all went wonky. So when adults come to me, I want to do this. And I do a lot of work with them in getting back into the place of play and out of that place of, which is almost always anxiety. And they can it can be a challenge to do, but once they can get themselves in that frequency of play around the thing that they're interested in, the opportunities start to come in,
Mm-hmm.
and things show up that they didn't think of themselves when they were thinking from that literal mind, trying to, how am I going to be a baseball player? You know, somebody shows up and says, you know, you want to buy my baseball team? And you're like, what? I didn't. Okay, that's not the best example, but you know what I mean? Like,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
opportunities show up that you wouldn't have expected if you're in the
Yeah,
right
because we
place.
put blinders on when we're looking for one specific thing rather than saying,
Right.
wow, you know, life is so full of so many opportunities. It could blow your mind that there could be something 10 times better for you than what you think.
Right. And these blinders that I think it's important to name are stories that we've been
Mm-hmm.
told by our family and our culture and community. And this restriction is often experienced as anxiety, because, you know, it's like if you're trying to find the way and you're trying to find it through this very narrow, you don't know what's in the rest of your periphery, and that's scary. And so we have all these stories about what's going to get us, what's going to stop
Mm-hmm.
us. Play is a very expansive, wide-angled vision and experience that's softer and gentler and easier on the body.
Yeah, easier to explore. That's awesome. And then there's one more gift after adulthood. So how do we get there?
So we move into elderhood, excuse me, where the natural gift is seeing.
Mm-hmm.
And what we mean by that is that elders have the ability to kind of look back at all the other life stages, because they've gone through it, and understand what's happening in each life stage, understand the processes that we were just talking about, and can make connections between what that person's struggling with, and maybe who would be a good person to connect them with, or what they might need, or a story that they might need to hear, or just some kind words that might need to be spoken. And that seeing, if coming from a place of one's own medicine, because it's been developed in all the other life stages, is a continued expression of a person's gift. It's another way of serving. Think of it like it's a matured way, excuse me, of playing, of learning, of serving. So that seeing is a continuation of those other four, just in a different expression.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other important thing I think about original medicine, is it's not something that we have to put down when we retire from or quit, right? That's why it can't be your talent. My talent might be sculpting, but there may be one day where these hands can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Does that mean my genius or gift is over?
Mm.
No, because that was not my genius or gift. My genius or gift is the frequency of who I am.
Mm.
And until I take my last breath, I can be in full relationship with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that last stage, you know, I talk about archetypes a lot. It really reminds me of like our wise elder, right? That can, it doesn't do so much judging, just kind of go as an observer, can see it all and go, yeah, you know, these are just the waves of life. Like they kind of just go, yeah, that's how life goes. And it can offer, you know, like you said, also knows that wisdom that can anticipate needs, or you know, things that other people could use in order to get past that.
Right.
But they're like more of a solid emotional character in our life, where they can just see it and go, wow, this is the big picture, and let's see how we can rearrange it, or offer some wisdom anyway.
Or draw the wisdom out in you. And that's, see, the thing is, you use it is an archetypal quality for sure. And it's an archetypal quality, I think, that used to be seen more in people who lived in relationship to that whole wheel, who brought play and learning and service into their adult life, into their older life. But my judgment is, and experience is, if there are restrictions in your frequency going through those life stages, by the time you get to your older years, you remain older and not elder.
Yes.
Unless you go back and build relationships so that you can be the manifestation of that archetype of the elder. That's another part of what we're working on with connecting with these gifts, to reestablish the role of the elder.
And there certainly is a difference between just having an old person and somebody who has a wise elder. I've seen wise elders and 5-year-olds.
And that's true too. Absolutely.
I mean,
You're right.
it's amazing to me. Sometimes the younger they are, the better wisdom they have on the world.
Because the frequency isn't restricted. That's exactly why you can see wisdom and that elder-like quality in youth, is because there's less of a restriction, and the more restricted it gets, the more distant we come from that archetypal quality of elderhood, which, yes, can happen in any life stage. I totally agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just amazing that child space still allows us to act all those out. And I love that too, because I think the child space is a really great place to look at our anxiety sometimes. You know what I mean? I know we put it away, but it's like, if we can play, for me anyway, when I go paint, I can then clear space, or maybe it just, as you're saying, it brings me back to my frequency, so I can tap into my more balanced elder, rather than the one that's, has a weird frequency because I'm under anxiety or stress or whatever. So sometimes we have to play before we actually think, at least in my book. I'll speak for me.
No, that works for me. Totally.
Yeah. Awesome.
And play also has, I mean, I think it's important. There's childlike and there's childish.
Sure.
Right. The elder is never childish, but
sure.
True elder. So when I use the word play, that play matures as we mature,
sure.
But it can remain childlike. And that's just a misunderstanding of a lot. I'm saying that because a lot of people are like, play, I'm an adult. Like, yeah. And do it in a childlike way, not a childish way. And they normally get what I mean by that.
Yeah, well, some people, like I've seen elders, they make up songs or sing stuff. I mean, that's their way of playing when they're not doing things, like it doesn't mean that they have to dance around their kitchen, although that's my preference. But other people, it is whatever they do to bring that joy back up.
Right.
That innocent joy is how I always look at that child type archetype, is that it's just like, it doesn't care what it looks like when it's dancing in the kitchen.
Right.
It does it because it's fun.
Exactly. That's childlike.
Yes, exactly. I mean, childish is just running away from responsibilities or doing stuff like that is not going to help you in your life. It's
the shadow side of the childlike, right?
Exactly.
And it often has anxiety embedded in it, or it's anxiety producing for the people around you.
Sure. I mean, a child that feels responsible would be anxiety producing.
Right.
Right. So what is one, I love all these tips. So what is one way that people can get back into these natural gifts? I mean, I know that you do a lot of, nature-based coaching, and this is kind of, what you really focus on. What are some ways that people might be able to release their anxiety, let's say, or be able to manage some anxiety with the 4 gifts? Yeah. I'm sure you've touched on it, but just to sum it up.
Build relationship to your frequency of play, whatever that is. In our program, Awakening the 4 Gifts, there's and I don't mean to pitch it, but
no, that's all right.
Part of what it asks is some questions to help you remember what it feels like when you're in that frequency of play, right? So kind of naming, I sometimes think of it in terms of like the ingredients of that frequency for yourself. So for me, and this is pretty common for most people, play is always accompanied by a feeling state of freedom, of expansiveness, of open-mindedness and curiosity, just to name a few.
Sure.
And then I go to an embodied place with that. Like, what does that feel like in my body? If those feelings had colors or smells or was a song, what would it be? And engage with those things. Bring more of those things in your life to increase that frequency in as a touchstone. Sounds simple, it is, and it's effective.
Yeah.
Another big one is nature connection. And you can live in a city. You don't have to live in the forest or, in some rural area. Just being outside, sometimes just doing something as simple as sitting under a tree, using your senses to observe, do it a couple minutes a day. There's study after study after study that demonstrate just a 20 minutes in nature, using your senses, quiets the mind, and decreases anxiety. And there is a free program on our website. I think it's a 14-day sit spot challenge, where it really just takes you through learning how to reuse your senses and engage with nature in a super simple way.
And I've taken that, so I can attest that it was fantastic. And
cool.
I don't sit spot as regularly as I would like to be. And I think that'll change when we get to Arizona, because I'll have new places to sit spot. As long as no snakes or scorpions come, I'll be happy. But it's a really great practice. I just wanted to say really quick, because I don't normally do this, and I don't live like on a farm or, a big area. So I live right inside of a town, and I chose 2 sit spots. So I have one close, in my backyard, so I can go out there anytime I need to. I can know where my spot is. I know what it smells like. I know what it feels like, and it's really great. It's like almost like we use sage for rituals or whatever, but me just smelling the earth and stuff, like I can tell just, it's thawing out here now, and the earth kind of opens up and you can smell the thaw, and I love that. And so sit spot was great for me, because it just gave me a break in my day to really do that reconnection with nature. And to what you've been saying about frequency, I could feel my frequency come back to center then. I could be like, oh, right, it was almost like a homecoming, like, right, I remember who I am now. Because we can get so caught up in our day. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just wanted to tell everybody how wonderful it is, and I really suggest that they go take it out.
Yeah, you didn't interrupt. It was actually me who did. I apologize. I was just going to say, sometimes the idea of having to sit 20 minutes, which is what we recommend in the program, causes anxiety for people. But they haven't done that before. And the second they sit and get still, although what I have to do is, and it's amazing how the things that cause you anxiety, when you actually get still, show up, right? To put you back in functional anxiety, right? And when they show up, it's an opportunity to look at them and to do something about them. But it can also, its natural state is that it's anxiety producing. It's kind of like this catch-22. And so I just encourage people to find the way to make it work for them. If 5 minutes a day is what you want to start with 5 minutes a day. If walking while doing some of the other exercises we suggest work, give that a go. If just having the window open for 5 minutes a day and letting the fresh air in is the best, what you can do to start, awesome. You can always build on that. And if
I like that, to start small, because that makes sense. And that's what I did. 5 minutes. I think I had to start with 5 minutes, because I'm not a meditator. I wasn't at that time. I didn't. Sitting still is really tough.
It is.
And I started with 5 minutes, and I got to tell you, within a week, I was like, oh, just 5 more minutes. Because it was so nice to be like, for these 5 minutes, I'm just not going to address these things. And I was able to put them away. I mean, it took a little practice, but I was able to, in my mind, I put them away. Like, I left them in the house. I was like, okay, all that stuff is in the house. So I'm going to go out here, and this is a clear space. And like, I had to really visualize all that in order to be still. But it went from 5 minutes to like, I think I was doing like 30 minutes by the time I was done, because it was such a nice space that it was like, okay, just 5 more minutes.
Yeah, cool. Well, here's one actually you asked for tips or ideas. Super simple. We call it a sense meditation. If you close your eyes, or you can keep them open, and turn your attention to your hearing, and try to listen to the furthest sound away that you can pick up on.
Okay.
And once you have that in your awareness, add to it a second sound. So you're holding 2 sounds at once. Maybe it's the bird and the airplane. And then maybe come in a step further and hear the bird and the airplane and the neighbor's dog barking. And you do that with a couple things. And then you can add another sense. Have your eyes and bird, dog, neighbor, airplane, tree waving in the wind. And as you start to add, actually almost always, as soon as you add 2 things in your awareness at once, your brain shifts.
Oh, nice.
And you can't go into that thinking mind where anxiety exists.
It's a good tip.
You may only be able to hold that for few seconds at first. But if you continue practicing and going back to that awareness of your senses, the anxiety place often kind of quells and even disappears.
Yeah. Yeah. And they say for anxiety, I forget the order of it, but it's like 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things.
Okay. It's the same thing.
Something like that. So it's very similar, but it really does help, especially even when you're not experiencing anxiety. It helps me, just like you said, just to sit still for 5 minutes, even if I'm not in the craziness of my anxiety. It just I see what you're saying, like coming back to that frequency with that is, then we can start afresh, like, because even if it's slightly off like this, it's gonna, if it just shakes a little bit, it means that we have more ability to go one way or another and not be in the same frequency that we do best at, I guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was a great tip. And what's one last takeaway? I know we've probably gone way over time, but what's one last takeaway that you want our podcasters to know before you go? And keep in mind, everybody, that all the links are around, so you can get to the Sagefire Institute's website and the 14-day sit spot you talked about, and some of the other really great resources they've got on their website.
Thanks. So one last tip, is that what you asked for?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at my little graphic here, thinking about play in childhood and focused learning in adolescence and service in adulthood and elderhood seeing. I think before the call, you and I were talking, while all of these, and it reminded me of this, while all of these things exist within ourselves, they're not meant to exist in a vacuum. And I know for myself, when I'm in a place of anxiety, I often put myself in a vacuum, right? And building relationship to each part or each one of these gifts within ourselves is best done in community, is best done with other people who are seeking to do it. All of this, like I said, we're meant to have elders in our lives and adults in our lives and teens in our lives and children in our lives. That's how we evolve. And being in relationship with those different life stages also puts us in touch with the gifts of each of those life stages, right? So I'm saying that for those people who are in that place with the self-help world where it's all about the self, and it cannot be all about the self. It's really a misunderstanding of, I think, who we are meant to be. And it's a place where we restrict the frequency in the act of trying to expand it. So I would invite people to just consider how each of these gifts exists within themselves and within the world around them. And if they see spaces where there's room for more children, and I don't mean go have more children, but have relationship with them, your neighbors, nieces, or your
nephews, whatever.
Exactly. Or adults and elders. And I mean, most of the people listening to this are probably in the adult life stage, but elders, who are the elders in your life? If you don't have any, maybe you can just set the intention to build relationship to some. And so that I would leave that sort of as a question for people to think about more than advice for what you should do.
Yeah, no, that's really great, because I think that, in the self-help world, we often talk about how it's, if we just fix ourselves, it's all going to be fixed. But one of the things that we're missing is those other people in our village that used to hold us accountable, and used to say, I'm seeing this thing in you, and I don't know, do you see this? They would reflect back to you who you were. That's the great thing about being in community, is that you have a lot of people to mentor you, whether that is from the child or the elder or anything in between. And I do believe that community is, it really takes a village to raise a child, to raise a fully functioning adult. It takes teams of people. So yes, remember to get support and to be with people and connect with people and have mentors. I think that's something that we forget about these days. Mentors are important.
Yeah. And just the last thing I'd say is that you just said, if we just fix ourselves, then that assumes that there's something to fix. That assumes that we're broken. And that's what that model tells us, you need help because you need it. And it goes right back to the start of our conversation. I think the anxiety that we experience is symptomatic of a culture that needs support and help.
Yeah.
And looking at that, as well as our own anxiety or whatever it might be, they have to happen in tandem. Otherwise, we're just reinforcing that there's something wrong with us.
That's such a great point, because we really need to know that it's nothing that's inherently wrong. Like the things that we think are wrong with us, they're just things that don't conform to our society. I mean, most of us, our natural instinct isn't to go when we are children to hurt other people or to do things, you know, like those aren't natural instincts either. Like, so all those terrible things that you're like, oh, if we didn't have laws and government, no, most of us still wouldn't do those things.
I agree with you. Yeah, I do agree.
If we lived in community, like it's just, and then to tell us, you know, what we should look like, how we should dress, you know, or how we should act with authority. It really is throwing off our own nature. So I love that these 4 gifts people can really look back on, and hopefully it has inspired people to really connect back to their own nature and really think about their own inner wisdom and how it might be conflicting, like to your point. So thank you so much. All of the links around here for Michael are around here. So, you know, look up, down, around, they're all here, somewhere here. And you can connect with him. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you and talk about nature-based coaching, or, you know, what's going on in your anxiety or life.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And we'll talk to everyone soon.